What starts as a luxurious VIP flight takes an unexpected and shocking turn mid-air. A single moment leaves everyone speechless. But what really happened? You won't believe how this story unfolds. Watch until the end to uncover the truth that left the entire cabin in uproar. Hit that like button, subscribe for more gripping stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support keeps us soaring high with more powerful content. The VIP section of the plane was quiet and orderly as the flight attendants ensured everything ran smoothly. Sasha Obama, a bright and curious little girl, sat comfortably in her seat near the window. She occasionally glanced around the cabin, enjoying the rare chance to fly alone in first class. Her father, former President Barack Obama, was seated in another part of the plane, working on documents that required his attention. For Sasha, the flight felt like an adventure, but her excitement turned into an unexpected ordeal. As a flight attendant named Mariah walked down the aisle, she wore an air of authority. Known among her colleagues for her sharp attitude and perfectionism, Mariah didn't tolerate anything that disrupted her carefully maintained order. When she stopped by Sasha's row to check on her, the little girl accidentally knocked over her glass of orange juice. The juice splashed onto Mariah's pristine uniform, staining the fabric. Sasha's eyes widened in shock and embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed immediately, her voice trembling. Mariah's expression hardened as she stared down at the spilled juice and the frightened child. "Sorry? That's all you have to say?" she snapped, her voice dripping with irritation. Before Sasha could respond, Mariah's frustration exploded. She raised her hand and slapped the little girl across the cheek. The sharp sound of the slap echoed through the VIP cabin, causing heads to turn in shock. Sasha recoiled, her cheek red and stinging as tears welled up in her eyes. "You know who flies in this section?" Mariah hissed, leaning closer to Sasha. "Important people, not messy, uncultured little girls like you. Look at you. You're just a black girl who doesn't know how to behave." The venom in her words struck harder than the slap itself. Sasha's face crumpled as tears streamed down her cheeks. She whispered, "I didn't mean to," but Mariah didn't give her a chance to finish. Around them, passengers began murmuring in disbelief. A woman across the aisle, visibly horrified, gasped, "Did she just hit that child?" Another passenger leaned forward, his expression furious, and said, "Unacceptable. This is outrageous." The murmurs grew louder as the tension in the cabin thickened. Mariah straightened her uniform, glaring at the passengers. "Stay out of this," she barked, her tone defensive. "She needs to learn some manners." A man sitting a few rows ahead stood up, his voice firm and authoritative. "That's enough. You have no right to treat a child this way." His words seemed to galvanize the other passengers, who started voicing their support for Sasha. The atmosphere in the cabin became electric with indignation. Mariah, visibly flustered, tried to maintain her composure but couldn't mask the growing unease in her demeanor. Meanwhile, Sasha sat frozen in her seat, clutching the armrest as tears continued to fall. A kind woman seated beside her gently handed her a tissue. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" she asked softly. Sasha nodded faintly, though her cheek still burned, both from the slap and the cruel words. One of the passengers decided to act. She approached another flight attendant, Isabella, and quietly explained what had happened. Isabella's face grew pale as she listened, and she immediately went to inform the senior crew members. Within minutes, the incident reached Barack Obama, who had been working quietly in a different section of the plane. When he heard what had happened to his daughter, his calm but commanding presence immediately took over. He stood, closed his laptop, and walked purposefully toward the VIP cabin. The murmurs quieted as Barack Obama entered the cabin, his presence commanding attention. Sasha's eyes lit up when she saw her father, and she immediately ran to him, burying her face in his chest. "Daddy," she sobbed, her small hands clutching his shirt. Barack knelt down, holding her gently but protectively. "What happened, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice calm yet filled with concern. Sasha couldn't find the words to explain, but the red mark on her cheek told him everything he needed to know. He looked up, his gaze locking onto Mariah. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried an intensity that made her visibly uncomfortable. "Excuse me," Barack said, his voice even but authoritative. "Would you care to explain what happened here?" Mariah, flustered, tried to defend herself. "It was an accident," she stammered. "She spilled juice on me, and I lost my temper." One of the passengers interrupted angrily. "Lost your temper? You hit a child and insulted her. That's not losing your temper, that's assault." Barack Obama stood, still holding Sasha protectively. "This is unacceptable behavior," he said firmly. "No child deserves to be treated this way, especially not my daughter." His words carried a weight that silenced the cabin. Isabella returned with the senior flight attendant and informed them of the escalating situation. The senior attendant approached Barack, bowing slightly in respect. "Mr. Obama, we sincerely apologize for this incident. We will handle it appropriately." Barack nodded but remained focused on Sasha, softly whispering words of comfort. The other passengers, now emboldened, continued to voice their support for the little girl and their outrage at Mariah's actions. The tension in the cabin reached its peak as everyone awaited the next step. The stage was set for a confrontation that would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. Barack Obama sat in the VIP cabin, his protective arm around Sasha as she clung to him. The red mark on her cheek was a stark reminder of what had just happened, and her tear-streaked face made the passengers around her seethe with anger. The murmurs grew louder as people expressed their disbelief at the behavior of the flight attendant, Mariah. Barack remained calm, though his eyes were fixed on her, his gaze steady and unwavering. Mariah, meanwhile, stood a few rows away, visibly flustered. Her usual confident demeanor was replaced with a mix of defensiveness and unease. "I didn't mean any harm," she muttered, but the passengers around her were unimpressed. A tall man in a suit turned to face her. "You didn't mean harm? You hit a child, insulted her, and then acted like it was justified. You've crossed every line of decency," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The cabin crew tried to de-escalate the situation, with Isabella, another flight attendant, stepping forward. "Please, everyone, we understand your concerns, and we assure you this will be addressed immediately," she said, glancing nervously at Barack. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her effort but not moving from his seat. Sasha buried her face in her father's chest, her small hands gripping his shirt tightly. Barack gently stroked her hair, whispering softly, "You're safe now, Sasha. No one will hurt you again." His calm voice reassured her, and her sobs began to quiet down, though her grip on him remained firm. Another passenger, an older woman named Mrs. Teresa, stood up and approached Barack. "Mr. Obama, I'm so sorry this happened to your daughter. This is absolutely unacceptable, and I want you to know that we're all on your side," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Barack looked up at her and nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. Your support means a lot to us." Around the cabin, more passengers began to voice their support. "She shouldn't be allowed to get away with this," one man said angrily. "If the airline doesn't do something, we'll file a complaint ourselves," another added. The atmosphere in the cabin grew tenser as the passengers rallied around Sasha and Barack. Mariah, sensing the rising hostility, tried to defend herself. "It was an accident. I just lost my temper for a moment," she said, her voice shaky but still defiant. A younger woman seated across the aisle shook her head. "An accident doesn't involve slapping a child or saying those horrible things. You need to take responsibility for your actions." Barack stood up, still holding Sasha in his arms. His presence immediately silenced the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your support and concern," he said, his voice calm yet authoritative. "But my priority right now is my daughter's well-being. I trust the airline will take appropriate action, and I'll ensure this incident is addressed." His words carried a weight that left no room for argument. As Barack spoke, Isabella hurried to inform the flight manager, who was already aware of the escalating situation. Within minutes, the manager, a composed and professional man named Mr. Thompson, arrived in the VIP cabin. He approached Barack with a respectful nod. "Mr. Obama, I've been informed of the incident. Please accept our deepest apologies. We will address this matter immediately," he said. Barack's gaze shifted to Mariah, who stood frozen, unable to meet his eyes. "I trust you will handle this appropriately," Barack said to Mr. Thompson. "My daughter has been through enough for one day." The flight manager turned to Mariah, his expression stern. "Mariah, your behavior is completely unacceptable. I'll be speaking with you privately after the flight," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Mariah opened her mouth to protest but quickly closed it, realizing she was out of options. As the situation began to de-escalate, the passengers continued to show their support for Sasha. Mrs. Teresa returned to her seat, her expression still filled with concern. "She's such a brave little girl," she whispered to her seatmate. The man nodded in agreement. "And Mr. Obama handled it with such dignity. That's true leadership." Barack sat back down with Sasha, who had calmed down but still clung to him. He kissed her forehead gently and said, "We'll be home soon, Sasha. You're safe now." Sasha nodded, her small hand clutching his. The tension in the cabin remained, but the focus had shifted to ensuring Sasha was comfortable and cared for. Passengers whispered among themselves, expressing their admiration for Barack's composure and their disgust at Mariah's actions. Meanwhile, Mariah stood near the back of the cabin, her face pale and her hands trembling. She could feel the weight of everyone's judgment pressing down on her, but her pride prevented her from apologizing. As the flight continued, Barack maintained his calm exterior, though inside he was determined to ensure that Mariah faced the consequences of her actions. This was not just about his daughter. It was about standing against unacceptable behavior and ensuring no other child would have to endure what Sasha had experienced. The chapter ended with the flight progressing toward its destination, but the tension in the air remained palpable. Everyone on board knew that the situation was far from over and that the real consequences awaited upon landing. As the flight neared its destination, the tension in the VIP cabin showed no signs of dissipating. Mariah remained stationed at the back of the cabin, avoiding eye contact with the passengers and occasionally attempting to justify her actions to herself. "It was just an accident," she muttered under her breath, though her trembling hands betrayed her growing anxiety. The whispers among the passengers were relentless, and their glances pierced through her usual facade of confidence. Barack Obama, seated beside Sasha, remained calm and composed. Sasha leaned against him, her small hands clutching his sleeve tightly. Though her tears had dried, the red mark on her cheek was a glaring reminder of the incident. Barak gently stroked her hair, whispering reassurances. "We're almost there, sweetheart. Everything will be fine." His tone was steady, but his resolve was firm. This incident would not be swept under the rug. The passengers continued to voice their indignation. Mrs. Teresa, who had been vocal earlier, now engaged in a quiet but determined conversation with several other passengers. "We must ensure this is addressed properly," she said. "What happened was not only unprofessional, but completely unacceptable." A man in a suit, Mr. Lewis, nodded in agreement. "If they don't take action, we'll have to escalate this ourselves. We can't let this slide." Isabella, the flight attendant who had tried to de-escalate the situation earlier, returned to the VIP cabin alongside Mr. Thompson, the flight manager. Mr. Thompson approached Barak and Sasha, his expression serious but respectful. "Mr. Obama," he began, "we've documented the incident and will ensure it is addressed appropriately once we land. Please accept our sincerest apologies on behalf of the airline." Barak looked up, his gaze unwavering. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," he replied. "I trust you understand the gravity of the situation. This isn't just about me or my daughter. It's about ensuring this never happens again." Mr. Thompson nodded, his tone firm. "You have my word. This behavior is unacceptable, and appropriate action will be taken." Meanwhile, Mariah stood at the back of the cabin, her face pale. She could hear fragments of the conversation between Mr. Thompson and Barak. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the full extent of the fallout she might face. She glanced around the cabin, noticing the disapproving stares from the passengers. Her usual confidence crumbled further as the weight of their judgment bore down on her. As the plane began its descent, the passengers prepared for landing, but the atmosphere in the cabin remained heavy. Mr. Thompson instructed the crew to ensure a smooth landing, but his focus remained on the situation at hand. He whispered to Isabella, "Make sure the security team is informed. I want this handled professionally and discreetly." The plane touched down smoothly, and the tension in the cabin seemed to intensify. As the doors opened and the passengers began to disembark, a small group of airline staff, led by the airline's executive director Raul, stood waiting at the gate. Raul's presence immediately signaled the seriousness of the situation. His expression was stern as he exchanged a brief, knowing glance with Mr. Thompson. Barak stood and gently lifted Sasha into his arms. The little girl rested her head on his shoulder, her fingers clutching his shirt tightly. As they exited the plane, the passengers who had witnessed the incident followed closely, their expressions a mix of support for Sasha and outrage toward Mariah. Several passengers whispered amongst themselves, expressing hope that the airline would handle the matter appropriately. Mariah, however, hesitated at the cabin door. She could see Raul and the other staff members waiting, their stern faces sending a chill down her spine. Her pride and fear battled within her, leaving her paralyzed for a moment. Finally, she stepped forward, trying to maintain a facade of composure, though her trembling hands and pale face betrayed her inner turmoil. Raul's gaze fixed on her as she exited. "Mariah," he said, his tone sharp and cold, "we need to talk, now." The passengers paused near the gate, watching as Raul led Mariah away toward the executive office. Several of them exchanged glances, their expressions filled with satisfaction that action was being taken. Meanwhile, Barak and Sasha were approached by Raul's assistant, who escorted them to a private lounge to ensure they were comfortable. Raul turned to Mr. Thompson. "Gather the senior staff. I want this matter resolved immediately," he said. His tone left no room for argument. Mr. Thompson nodded and quickly left to carry out the instructions. As Barack sat with Sasha in the lounge, he remained calm, though his mind was already working through the next steps. He knew the matter would gain public attention, and he was determined to use the opportunity to highlight the importance of accountability and respect. Back in the executive office, Mariah sat across from Raul and the senior staff. The atmosphere was tense as Raul addressed her firmly. "Your actions have not only violated company policy, but also damaged the reputation of this airline. This is an egregious breach of professionalism, and there will be consequences." Mariah's voice trembled as she tried to defend herself. "It was just a mistake. I didn't mean to—" Raul raised a hand, cutting her off. "This is not the time for excuses. You struck a child and used language that is utterly unacceptable. This airline has no room for behavior like this." As the meeting continued, the reality of her situation sank in for Mariah. The passengers who had rallied around Sasha and Barack had made it clear that they would not let this incident go unnoticed. The stage was set for the final resolution, and Mariah could no longer deny that her actions had brought her career to the brink. After the flight had landed and the passengers disembarked, the situation shifted from the tense confines of the VIP cabin to the formal setting of the airline's executive offices. Mariah was escorted there by 2 senior crew members, her shoulders stiff and her face pale. The reality of the situation weighed heavily on her, but her pride refused to let her fully admit the seriousness of what she had done. She glanced at the passengers filing out, avoiding their judgmental stares, but their murmurs of disapproval were impossible to ignore. In the private lounge, Barack Obama sat with Sasha on his lap, comforting her as she rested her head on his shoulder. Her cheek, though no longer as red as before, still bore the faint mark of Mariah's slap. Barack gently stroked her hair, whispering, "It's over now, Sasha. You're safe." His calm demeanor reassured her, and her grip on his sleeve relaxed slightly. Around them, airline staff hurried to ensure their comfort, bringing water and offering blankets, but Barack's focus remained solely on his daughter. Raul, the airline's executive director, entered the lounge with a firm expression. "Mr. Obama," he began, his voice steady, "I want to personally apologize for what happened to your daughter. This behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. We are conducting a thorough investigation, and I assure you that the necessary actions will be taken." Barack nodded, his tone calm but resolute. "Thank you for your swift response, Mr. Raul. My concern is not just for my daughter, but for the standards of treatment for all passengers. What happened today was beyond unacceptable, and I trust your actions will reflect that." Raul assured him again, before excusing himself to oversee the ongoing disciplinary proceedings. Meanwhile, in the executive office, Mariah sat across from a panel of senior executives, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her usual confidence had been replaced by a visible nervousness. Raul stood at the head of the table, his gaze sharp as he addressed her. "Mariah, your behavior on this flight has not only violated every standard of professionalism, but has also tarnished the reputation of this airline. Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" Mariah's voice wavered as she attempted to respond. "It was a moment of frustration. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her tone defensive. "I was just trying to keep order in the cabin." Raul's eyes narrowed. "Keeping order? You struck a child and made blatantly racist remarks. That is not keeping order. That is a complete failure of judgment and character. This is not something that can be explained away or dismissed." One of the senior executives leaned forward, her voice cold. "We've received over a dozen complaints from passengers on the flight, including written statements describing your actions. This is not an isolated incident of poor judgment. It's a clear violation of our code of conduct." Mariah tried to interrupt, her voice rising. "I've worked for this airline for years. I've dealt with difficult passengers before, and this was no different. I didn't know who she was." Raul raised his hand to silence her. "It doesn't matter who she was. Every passenger deserves respect, and every child deserves protection, regardless of their background. Your actions today showed a complete disregard for these principles." As the weight of Raul's words settled over the room, Mariah's defenses began to crumble. She realized there was no escape from the consequences of her actions. Her reliance on her past connections and reputation within the airline was no longer enough to shield her. The executives delivered their decision. Her employment with the airline was terminated effective immediately. She was escorted out of the office, her head bowed and her shoulders slumped. Meanwhile, in the lounge, Sasha had fallen asleep in Barack's arms, her breathing even and peaceful. The tension that had gripped her earlier seemed to have faded, replaced by the safety and comfort of her father's presence. Barack looked down at her, his expression softening. He kissed her forehead gently and whispered, "We'll be home soon, Sasha." Raul returned to the lounge to update Barack on the outcome of the disciplinary proceedings. "Mr. Obama," he said, his tone respectful, "Mariah has been terminated from her position. We will also be conducting a review of our training programs to ensure incidents like this never happen again." Barack nodded, his gaze steady. "Thank you, Mr. Raul. I appreciate your efforts to address this swiftly. It's important that we use this incident as a lesson to uphold the values we claim to stand for." As Barack and Sasha prepared to leave, several passengers who had supported them during the flight approached quietly to express their continued solidarity. One of them, Mrs. Teresa, said softly, "Mr. Obama, I'm so sorry for what your daughter went through. She's incredibly brave, and so are you." Barack offered a kind smile. "Thank you, ma'am. Your support and the support of everyone on the flight meant a great deal to us." The airport staff escorted Barack and Sasha to their waiting car. As the vehicle pulled away, Sasha stirred slightly, opening her eyes. "Are we going home, Daddy?" she asked softly. Barack smiled and hugged her close. "Yes, Sasha, we're going home." Back in the executive office, Mariah sat alone, her belongings packed into a small box. The reality of her actions and their consequences began to sink in fully. Her career, her reputation, and her future had all been irreparably damaged by a single moment of anger and poor judgment. As she left the building, the whispers of her former colleagues followed her, a painful reminder of the path she had chosen. For Sasha and Barack, the ordeal had ended, but the lessons it carried remained. It was a powerful reminder of the importance of respect, dignity, and accountability in every interaction. For Mariah, however, it was the beginning of a long journey of reflection and regret, one that she would carry with her for years to come. The aftermath of the incident lingered for days, casting a shadow over everyone involved. For Barack Obama and Sasha, life moved forward, but the memory of the flight and the injustice they experienced remained fresh. Sasha, though resilient, occasionally touched her cheek, as if recalling the sting of the slap and the cruel words that had accompanied it. Barack, ever the supportive father, ensured that his daughter felt loved and safe, using the moment to teach her about strength, dignity, and the importance of standing up against wrongs. In stark contrast, Mariah's world crumbled around her. The airline issued a formal statement apologizing for the incident and announcing Mariah's termination. Public backlash followed swiftly as news of the event spread. Passengers from the flight shared their stories on social media, praising Barack's composure and condemning Mariah's actions. The incident became a symbol of the broader fight against prejudice and injustice, gaining widespread attention. Mariah, now unemployed and ostracized, struggled to come to terms with her downfall. Days turned into weeks as she searched for work, but every application was met with rejection. Her name had become synonymous with unprofessional behavior, and no airline or service industry employer wanted to be associated with her. Bills piled up, and friends she had once relied on began distancing themselves, unwilling to risk their own reputations. One afternoon, Mariah sat alone in her small apartment, staring at her phone. On the screen was a blank email draft addressed to Barack Obama. She had spent hours composing and deleting messages, trying to find the right words to express her regret. Her mind replayed the events of that day on the plane, each moment sharpening the sting of her actions. Finally, she typed a brief but heartfelt apology, admitting her mistakes and acknowledging the pain she had caused. With a deep breath, she pressed send. Weeks passed without a response. Mariah understood that she might never receive one. Her actions had spoken louder than any apology could, and the damage she had caused was irreversible. The silence was a reminder of the weight of her choices and the consequences they carried. Meanwhile, Barack and Sasha continued their lives with quiet strength. For Sasha, the incident became a lesson in resilience. With her father's support, she channeled the experience into a deeper understanding of compassion and kindness. Barack used the public attention the event garnered to advocate for better training and accountability in customer service industries, emphasizing the importance of treating every individual with dignity and respect. One day, while running errands, Mariah found herself near the airport. She passed by a cafe and noticed a familiar figure inside. It was Sasha, now smiling and vibrant, sitting across from Barack. The sight stopped Mariah in her tracks. She watched as Sasha laughed at something her father said, her cheeks glowing with happiness. The red mark was gone, replaced by the brightness of her smile. Mariah felt a pang of regret so deep it nearly overwhelmed her. She turned and walked away, unable to face them. As she moved through the busy streets, she realized the weight of her regret would never fully lift. Her career, her relationships, and her sense of self had been destroyed by a single moment of anger and prejudice. That moment had defined her, not only in the eyes of others, but in her own heart. For the Obamas, the incident faded into the background of their lives, serving as a reminder of the strength of their bond and the importance of standing against injustice. For Mariah, it became a haunting lesson that lingered in the quiet moments of her life, a constant echo of what could have been had she chosen differently. The story concluded not with redemption, but with the quiet understanding that some choices carry consequences too heavy to erase. Respect, humility, and accountability, as Sasha and Barack had shown, are not just ideals, but necessities in building a just and compassionate world. For Mariah, the weight of her failure would remain a part of her forever, a testament to the cost of prejudice and a reminder of the strength it takes to stand for what is right. What do you think about this shocking story? How would you have reacted if you were in their place? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it with your friends. Your support helps us bring you even more inspiring content.